What's going on, everybody? Welcome to season 3 of the Release the 8 podcast. Yes, we are in season 3, and we are going to be talking about evangelistic communication and just evangelism in general as regards to Gen Z. Last season, we were talking about ministry in a season of decline, and go back and listen to those episodes. I think we had some really great musings. But what Linton and I really want to talk about now is how do we communicate the gospel in a way that makes sense for this current generation? Anyone who's from 15 to 25 years old, if you're paying attention, they are different. The way they think, the way they operate. And I don't mean that negatively or positively. They just are different. They are not millennials. And any of us that are working in those environments, whether it's me as a campus ministry leader with collegiates, or if it's Linson being a pastor and working in a church that's multi-generational. Maybe you're a parent listening to this and you're like, yeah, I have a Gen Zer in my house. They're different. We want to figure out how to talk about this well. And the way that I would intro into this series is by a metaphor, and that is of a dartboard. I felt like back in 2010, when I was doing ministry on the college campus, talking with millennials, I felt like if you could sit down with me and talk to me about Jesus, I understood how you thought, what you were feeling, what you were considering as far as spiritual things, that if we were having a true and open conversation, you were going to come to Christ. Like I knew how to deliver the gospel in a way that made so much sense to you that you were ready to say yes. And I don't mean to say that I'm the Holy Spirit or that I make people come to Christ. We know all that's not true. But what I mean is I was so dialed in to how to communicate to that generation that it was just almost inevitable. It's like what C.S. Lewis would say, that the hound of heaven. It's like when he's on your tracks, game over. And that's how we felt. We saw almost 1,000 people coming to Christ a year when I was in San Diego, historic numbers. Wow. And it was as if I was standing in front of a dartboard 1 foot away and I could just put the dart in the bullseye. That's how evangelism felt. Like if we get an opportunity to talk with you and you're open, it's going to be a bullseye. You're going to come to Christ. It just felt like that. Thousands of people coming to Christ. Some of you are listening to this podcast that know me. You know what I'm talking about. Like there are incredible stories of people making decisions for Jesus. Fast forward to 2020. I feel like sometimes when I'm talking with students, it's as if I'm 100 feet away with a blindfold on. And if I hit the board, I'm like a hero. Like, oh my gosh, I hit the board. I don't know what number I got. It might be a 1, not a 50 in the middle of a bullseye. And if you might be laughing with me if you work with young people, because that's just how it felt. The number one way we see that, I think, is with ghosting. Like people just don't come back. I've had so many conversations where I felt like that was a good conversation and I never see the person again. What is that about? Well, if you're a cultural analyzer like I am, or you care about connecting with people and what makes sense for them, not just sense for you, what that tells me is what I'm saying isn't resonating. And I'm not changing what I'm thinking about. I'm not changing the gospel, but the cultural rhetoric is different now. And if we don't talk in a way that makes sense, we're going to get ghosted. People are going to say no to Jesus. And again, there's a tension. I don't mean to say all of the pressures on us to do it perfectly, because we are partnering with the Holy Spirit and he's the one that regenerates and calls people to faith. I get that. But we also have a responsibility to communicate well. And if you're anything like me, communicating in today's age with Gen Z needs careful attention of what kind of language we're using and how we're contextualizing the gospel so that we can hit the bullseye and help people come to Jesus. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. And we have something really powerful to share with you today that Linson and I have stumbled into. But let me kick it to you, Linson. That was a long intro. What are you thinking about? How's that resonate with you?
No, Bo, thanks for queuing that up. Like always, I appreciate the metaphor, but you're right. I mean, this is not a new thing, right? We should not be upset at ourselves that the message doesn't resonate. Like, there's some truth to that. I remember like in the 80s and 90s growing up, I was given a diagram called, I believe it's called the bridge diagram. Like I was on one side by myself and I would try to jump this cliff or something, and I kept falling, like, like Mario Brothers. I would fall down the middle of it, and I needed something to help me get across. And so someone would draw a cross there, and that's how I walked across the cross to be with Jesus. You and I know that in our times at the university, that metaphor kind of fell flat with millennials. There was something about it that was captivating, but no one, in a world that felt so networked, in a world that felt like we were becoming a global village, it felt weird to talk about my individual rescue when I knew about a world that was totally falling apart. What was God doing with everything else in the world while I just moseyed across the chasm? And I think the millennials were thinking about something different. So InterVarsity, through James Chung and others, created that new world diagram where the story didn't end with merely us coming to Christ ourselves, but we were following this Jesus that was changing the entire world. And we were called with God to change the world with him through the power of the Holy Spirit, that even little old me with Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit, we could change the world, And I mean, as a millennial, I was just like, man, now that is a cap. I want to give my life to Jesus like that. I have found, and I even started a blog called Everyday World Changer, right? Even now, for any young person hearing that, and even you're chuckling right now, any young person that hears that, they start to smirk at that. They're like, okay, I'm going to be a world changer. I'm really surprised at how flat the affect is about changing the world with Gen Z. They live in a world now where that is not possible in their mind, changing the world. You know how crappy the world is? Or if it is possible, is it even worth doing? And so just the subtle shift in the generation creates a block for a gospel message that we were just thrown right into the bullseye, like you were saying. And so now, even when I say some of these phrases, I can even feel that they're dated. They feel like they're a little stale for a Gen
well,
Z.
let me cut in on you, because I want to hear why. And I hear our listeners going, what do you mean why? Like, if the idea of becoming a world changer resonated with millennials. So in recap, what I'm hearing you say is, the bridge diagram was a metaphor for atonement on penal substitution, like personal sin. Like, hey, Jesus can save you and get you across the chasm to be in right relation with God, which we believe, and we still believe.
100%.
But you're saying that didn't totally resonate with the millennial, because what about all my friends? What about the world? Like, I want to make a change in this world. So yes, I need personal sin, but I need a gospel that's bigger than personal sin that can restore the world. So come on, Linson, I'll be a world changer with you. And that resonated. So what do you mean Gen Z doesn't resonate with world changers? Or when you say smirking, like, what, doesn't everyone want to be a world changer? Like, say more about that. Like,
yeah, thanks for asking that question. So there's almost a sense that there was something about an individual and living in the West, let's say that they could pursue a dream that not only would bring themselves prosperity, but would bring the world to a place of prosperity. Like, go to college, get a reputable job, get married, buy a house, and then start contributing to society, whether that's giving your life away at the mission field, or giving away money, or being a part of nonprofit organizations, right? None of us in the kind of older category that's listening right now, we're like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, in America, we'd call that pursuing the American dream, making an impact in society. You can do that. You, as an individual, you have the worldview to see that happen. But if you talk that world that our parents prepared us for, if I begin to prepare my children for that world has fundamentally changed. That world doesn't exist anymore. Let's talk about that. Go to college, right? We live in a world where the student loan epidemic, right? I mean, like, there in any room that you go into, there's probably several people that owe hundreds of thousands of dollars for a student loan. So, I mean, I think Gen Z is wondering if they should even go to college. right? Get a reputable job. What did that mean for us? It meant, at least from a South Asian worldview, it was like, and it's probably true for all people, like get a reputable job, doctor, lawyer, engineer, business person, be a small business owner, right? All of that has changed, right? I mean, you talk to doctors and lawyers now, they might be like, I don't know if it's worth getting in the game. I mean, even the barriers of entry are so high. I mean, and most Gen Zers are thinking about, maybe I could be a YouTube star. I mean, pun intended, we're on YouTube, but get married. I mean, the entire institution of marriage is falling apart, right? I mean, when you can say that, like, I don't know, 60% or so of marriages fail. I mean, why do I even want to enter into that institution, right? Buy a house. Are you kidding me? It's so hard to buy a house right now. The loan, the amount of what houses cost around the country. I'm in Texas right now, in Dallas. It used to be easy to move here and get a house. Now it's like being priced out of the market. So all that to say, a Gen Zer is looking at the world that you told them to go out and change, and they find that your advice doesn't fit in a fundamentally different world, right? Does that make sense? Like, that's just one way of analyzing it. It's not the same anymore.
What I'm hearing you say, and you and I have talked a lot about this, is optimism is collapsing. People in Gen Z, again, generally speaking, doesn't even necessarily have to be Gen Z. It could be anyone in our world right now, but a lot of Gen Zers that we're running into, they don't have a lot of optimism about the world.
Yeah. It's a good way to say
it. Can I get that college degree and actually make something out of it? Or is debt going to just cripple me?
Yeah. Yep.
Can I really have that marriage that you say I can have when divorce rates are over 50% and my family sucks?
Yep.
Can I really get that house because pricing is so high, like you're saying? So like there's a lack of optimism. And so with millennials, the idea of changing the world, it actually comes from this latent part of them that is like, man, I do have optimism about this. Like I have optimism in my faith. I have optimism that I can make a difference. What I'm hearing you say is that right now, a lot of people in this younger generation, they don't have a lot of optimism about their own life, let alone what they could do for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Collapsing optimism. I think you nailed it. Like, I mean,
tell me what you were saying about people with regards to the pandemic?
Yeah. Like I was about to share that. Like, I mean, I know this might be like a sad example, but both here locally with young people around me, and one of my professors at Fuller was sharing very similar things, that there were some students that welcomed the pandemic. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say. There was like, life was moving so fast. It was so their life was so connected, moving so fast with so many pressures, anxiety, fears placed upon them, that when the pandemic came and turned everything off, it was like almost like they were walking into like some apocalyptic film, right? That like that they almost welcomed it. It was like they could turn everything off, be in a cocoon, stay isolated, be away from everybody. And it fit in their mentality that optimism is failing, right? I mean, pandemics like this, I mean, they don't happen to every generation, right? So it came upon Gen Z, and they already had a view that things were collapsing. And now this pandemic happens, and in some ways it was a relief from a collapsing world, right? It's like, let's all stay disconnected, kind of get into our own isolated bubbles. And when you go up to them and, hey, you can be an everyday world changer, they're like, what are you talking about, bro? I mean, there's no changing this world. I mean, the very environment is fighting us back. I mean, the world, I mean, we have a pandemic that's trying to wipe out humanity in their mind, I mean, so in their mind, it's not an optimistic worldview. Does that make sense? Their optimism is collapsing.
Yeah. And so what I'm thinking about is a podcast you and I have been listening to by Mark Sayers. And in a recent episode, he talks about the difference in our world moving from complicated to complex.
Oh, yes.
And when he talks about the world being complicated, he actually spent some time talking about the early 1900s. And, they had to figure out how to make things operate in a consistent way. So he didn't say this, but I'm thinking assembly line, right? Like, how do you make things to the same standard over and over and over? And he uses the word calculated. Complicated things need calculated solutions. If I do A, then B will happen, repeat, right? And then you can, boom, make stuff happen over and over and over and over again. And he goes on to say that our world has been a complicated one, but he says now our world has actually become complex. And when you are in a complex world, calculation doesn't work. There's not calculation for complexity. So one of the ways that he would say it is the one that's coming off the top of my head is he used the metaphor of like throwing a rock in a pond. He's like, complicated meant you threw one rock in the pond and then you had a ripple. And it's like, can I create another ripple? And it'd be one after another after another. Complex is I throw 6 rocks in the pond at the same time and there's 6 different ripples. What do I do with that? How do I do that? And so where my mind is going with all of this, and now I'm going to pivot our podcast episode and start getting us really into the season. Follow me. Tell me if this makes sense. If complexity doesn't have any calculation, so the housing market's going crazy, student debt is out of control, and the way the university is being run is unprecedented. A global pandemic has been thrown into the mix, and a tiny invisible virus that comes from Wuhan has wrecked our whole world. Like, what? Like, you can't calculate that. If there's complexity that you can't calculate, what does that do to optimism? I don't have any. I can't predict, because optimism comes from calculation. Optimism comes from being able to say, if I do A, then B will happen. So I'm optimistic about the equation, the result, right? As soon as complexity is thrown in and I can't calculate, I can't be optimistic because I don't know what's going to happen. I can't trust anything to be predictable. Is this resonating so far? Where I'm going with that is, in that reality where optimism is slipping, I think this is where dystopian reality is introduced. And some of you listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about when I say dystopia. Some of you listening to this are going, what language are you speaking now? Like, did Bo just have an outbreak of tongues? Like, no, dystopian genre or dystopian worldview is a very real thing. Dystopian, which I'm going to let you talk about, Linson. Dystopian worldview is basically one that is super unoptimistic. It's a breakdown of epic proportions. It's a fearful state. Things aren't going to get better. And when we think about dystopian genres, whether it's movies or shows, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, first, is what I'm saying makes sense? And then tell us a little bit more about what dystopia is. Like, what are some of the shows and movies that connect with it? And what in the heck does this have to do with evangelism and Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, so I love where we're going here. So if our optimism continues to slip, meaning we can't calculate the future, which is what we're saying.
Because there's so much complexity.
An optimistic person can at least say, I know how to get out of here. That's what our optimistic friend says, right? That's what the optimistic leader says, right? I can chart the course out of here. But when it is so complex, we're in a world and you're growing up in this world, this complex world, you can't calculate your way out. And if you
let me interject, or people's calculations that they're giving you, you say, I don't think that really works, dude.
They don't make sense, right?
Going to college is not very calculated to me in an optimistic way, or getting married and having kids sounds like a tragedy. So your calculation to get out and become successful, I'm watching our world, and the people I see that have degrees in crippling debt, or the people I see that have terrible marriages, or the people I see that can't even pay their rent or mortgage. No, thank you. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. In a way, what you're saying is they're saying your calculations are a myth,
Yes. Or they
so
don't work in this complex world.
yeah, you're living in la la land, right?
Yes.
If you're really going to sit down and figure out how to calculate this, you're going to find you can't get out. And once you find you can't get out, you slip into this. Then you're like, wait a second, this is a dystopia, right? Like there's no way out of this, right? Which is dystopia, like you said, is a genre of writing. It's a genre of literature, like we're saying, movies and stuff like that. And what is it? It's a time of great suffering and injustice, usually totalitarian regimes or war or outbreak or zombies. There's all sorts of different ways to look at it.
I'll give us a definition for the listeners. Then you keep going. This is just straight out of Wikipedia. The meaning of dystopia is an imagined world or society in which people lead wretched, dehumanized, fearful lives.
Man, yikes. Wretched, dehumanized, fearful lives, right? And you look at the way the world is, to a Gen Zer, right? It's slowly becoming that, right? And so there's so many ways, there's so many rabbit trails here, Bo, but like dehumanized, right? What is technology doing to us, right? It's causing us to be connected in a way we've never been before, but isolated in a greater way, right?
Look at the current war.
Yeah. Fearful, right? Yeah, like you were saying, look at the war right now. Fearful. Like we see anxiety and fear on the rise, right? I mean, I feel like mental health is so huge right now, and it continues to paint a dystopian worldview. Some of our favorite shows on TV, some of our favorite movies are depicted in a post-apocalyptic dystopian worldview. I mean, Hunger Games. We can go back even further than that. Oh, Squid Games. I haven't watched it yet, but I hear that's got that same reference or that same mindset, right? And so I think what we're finding ourselves in is we're talking about like a nobility around Jesus, the world changer, and us in this noble effort to change the world rings hollow in a dystopian reality. And so what you and I need to figure out, along with all of our friends that watch the Release the A.P.E podcast, and we're calling all our community here, is can we enter into this dystopian worldview? And can we find glimmers of the gospel message, who Jesus is in this space, right? Because we can see the echo chambers throughout our cultural moment of echoing back to us, yeah, the world sucks. The world is hard. There is not a calculated way out of this complex mess that we're in. Am I making sense?
I think we can leave it here is if you followed us this far, first of all, give yourself a pat on the back, because we talked about a lot of things in this episode. But if you followed us this far, what we're getting at, Linton and I want to talk about over the coming weeks, is we think the dystopian worldview is ruling the day right now. Mm-hmm. And a dystopian worldview is not an optimistic worldview. We're not saying we agree with this. What we're saying is it is. It doesn't matter if we agree with it or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. It doesn't matter if you're frustrated at your kid or not. It doesn't matter if you're frustrated at college students or not. Like, why are they like this? Why do they do that? Dystopian worldview is different. It just is. But the reality is there's still a gospel message that sings true to someone in a dystopian worldview. There's a gospel message for them, an invitation that can actually rescue them out of that worldview. And before I sound like I'm just putting down Gen Z or the dystopian worldview, no, the American dream was a worldview. The optimism of advancement is a worldview, and the gospel has a confrontation for that too. It has an invitation for that too. What we're saying in this episode is we knew how to speak to the American dream. We knew how to speak to the world changer that wanted to become one, but didn't know how and needed Jesus to invite them into the kingdom and show them real power. We know how to do that. We are saying in this episode, we don't know how to preach the gospel powerfully in a resonating way to someone that is in a dystopian worldview or mind frame. And so if this resonates with you, like, yes, I think we are in a dystopian reality. And yes, I think we need to figure out how to preach this. We need you to email us. We need you to leave a comment on this episode. We need you to tweet us or Instagram us. Let us know this resonates, because what we're going to do then from here is we're going to get into some topics around felt needs. Like, what are the biggest felt needs of someone with a dystopian worldview? Like, what are they feeling and caring about and resonating with? Why? Because that's going to help us know how to talk about which gospel stories should be shared, or Jesus stories should be shared into those felt needs, so that Jesus is relevant to them. So he's meeting them truly on their turf in the way they view and see the world. What are the best atonement metaphors for someone that is fearful or thinks everything's falling apart or doesn't have hope and is low on optimism? What atonement metaphor do they need? They certainly don't need a personal forgiveness of sins metaphor. They need something else. So if this resonates, let us know, because Linton and I want to spend time talking about how to speak in a captivating way to the dystopian worldview and call it into the kingdom of God. And we're going to do it, I guess, anyways. But if we're only going to get one view, we might as well just do it offline. But if this is resonating with you, we'll put our discussions on camera and figure it out together. So that's where we're landing. That's where we're going. What do you think?
Yeah.
Any last words, Linton, or is that good?
No, yeah. I mean, one of the things that you said, Bo, offline, I just want to say, like, the mantra of, and again, we love Gen Z, or we want to be talking about this. I mean, these are young people that we love, and we want them to come into the kingdom. And it's a worldview that, may start young, but it will spread, and we're going to see it in our peers, and we're going to see it everywhere. But one of the things you said was, a young person would say, I'd rather slide further and further into dystopia than put my hope into something else that might fail. Like, that sentence just was so haunting to me, because it feels so foreign to a millennial. I'd rather just keep sliding into dystopia than to put my hope into something else that might fail. And in a society where you just see hero after hero in every single sector of society crumble and fall, I mean, why would I want to put my faith into something else that might fail? I think that to me really, I mean, when you said that really drove into the heart of that worldview. And who can we introduce but Jesus into that worldview? But how? I think is
resignation feels easier or more appropriate than hope, because hope or optimism is letting people down. And I don't mean biblical hope. I just mean hope in the general sense. And we see mental health on the rise. Suicide's a big deal. Lots of people are slipping into this mind frame and worldview of, why does it matter? It's all crashing down anyways.
And I mean, and like what you said, I mean, you just triggered another idea. Vocationally speaking, they call this the Great Resignation. I mean, everyone's just like, you know what? Why keep working either? So I mean, it all feeds together. I think we're finding the resonance here. It's in different places. We're seeing a slip into dystopia. So
so we're not ending on just such a sad note. Linton and I have a lot of hope and energy about speaking the gospel in this. We think Jesus has a lot to say about this. Jesus has great news that's actually real and fulfilling and can fulfill the promises that he has. And it doesn't have to be a fleeting reality. It doesn't have to be the rug pulled out from underneath people. We have to learn how to communicate the gospel in a way that resonates, so that it's not something that just feels like, okay, here they go again, trying to sell me something that's never going to come through. We have to understand that's the feeling, but there is a way to communicate this. And we're so excited to talk about it and dream about this with you and work this out. So keep listening. God bless you. And please let us know if this resonates with you, or if me and Linton are just crazy here in our vacuum. Have a good day.
Love you guys.
Bye.